Hello and welcome to this special episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. Get ready to embark on a journey of wonder and amazement as we delve into the incredible history of Truehope Canada. Our story is about resilience and perseverance in the face of great challenges, and we're excited to share it with you. Join us as we explore the highs and lows and the tragedies and triumphs that have shaped our company into what it is today. This is the first episode in a series of 8 where Mr. David Steffen, who is VP of Truehope Canada, and I will come together to take you on a step-by-step journey through our company's fascinating past. So sit back, relax, and welcome to the Truehope Family Files Part 1, Tragedy Strikes. Enjoy the show. Okay, good morning, David. Thank you so much for being with us today. How are you? What is going well?
Well, everything's going well, and I'm doing really good. Thank you, Simon.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited to get into this series with you, being part 1 to kick things off. And as you know, we've been working in the background on this project for quite some time. And I think it's really finally time to share this quite amazing True Hope story in a much more detailed step-by-step format. And I've been working with True Hope Canada for 7 years, and I'm still learning the many incredible details of this story, the court battles, the censorship, and the fact that this product, Empower Plus, has supported hundreds of thousands of people all across the world for many different disorders. And I think many people are going to be very familiar with who you are and what it is that you do within True Hope Canada and within Canada. But for those people who are unfamiliar with you, do you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction about who you are?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been with working for my father's company here for 20 years now. Actually, this upcoming month, 21 years since I was a young guy, and absolutely love what we do here with True Hope. I started off at the bottom of the totem pole. Had to work my way up the ranks to the point where I found myself going back into sales because before I worked with my father, I was actually into sales and did very well there. And so I got into marketing and sales, and we spearheaded a project to take our model of selling our products direct to consumer and actually decided to put them into retailers, put them into naturopathic doctors' offices, all that type of stuff. So we came out with kind of a rebranded version of our product line and began to do that, put it into these retailers, into health food stores. And as part of that, naturally, found myself traveling across Western Canada mainly, sometimes into Eastern Canada, but mainly through Western Canada, doing a lot of presentations, spending a lot of time at the health shows, doing public presentations there, putting on public educational seminars with health food stores. And it's just been a really great journey because in all of it, even though we've done really well with selling products, the most rewarding part out of all of this is the fact that we've changed lives. And that's what we've seen all along. And that's what really fuels, I think I can speak on behalf of our entire team across Canada, that's what really propels us forward is when we hear those stories coming back about saving lives, saving marriages, saving relationships, as we change people's perspective on life, as we help them elevate to a greater degree where they feel good when they wake up in the morning. They're motivated to pursue their dreams rather than being caught in the pit of despair with depression and anxiety. And so that's really kind of, in a nutshell, over the past 20 years, 21 years, working my way up the ranks, doing video work, doing IT work, doing, the most simple tasks at Truehope to eventually working my way up to the point that I oversee the Canadian retail division and have been doing so now for the past 12 years.
Amazing. Yeah, it really is quite something to work within an organization that is truly helping people every single day. My role here at Truehope Canada is kind of everything marketing, and I have this beautiful immediate connection with our consumers, whether they're talking to us through social media or just by email or through our website. Uh, I see every single day evidence this product is getting into the lives of people, and it's changing their lives literally within days when they've been going through like tragic decades of their lives. And it really is just like this energizing, fueling environment to be a part of, because if you're actually doing something that's actually making a significant difference in the world and to individual people, it's honestly super addicting, and it's a really really positive environment to be in. So we've had yourself and we've had your dad on the show before, giving us accounts of the True Hope story. We've jumped into the past there before, and those episodes are around 45 minutes to an hour each, and it doesn't really do justice to the vastness of the detail that's within the True Hope story. So that's why I'm super excited to start this series with you in part one today. And yeah, it's gonna be such a treat to go through it. And I think we're also gonna share some images and share some videos throughout that are very important to the story to give a lot of context. And if you do have the ability, I know a lot of people are just gonna be listening to this, but if you've got the ability to watch this on Spotify or on Rumble or on YouTube or on Vimeo, you can actually watch some of those videos along with us, and you can see those images as well. But if you're just listening as well, you're going to get a lot out of this, so that's not going to be that much of a problem. So we're going to kick this thing off. The story begins in the early 70s with your parents, so why don't you take us back there, and we'll go through this timeline.
For sure, for sure. And it's hard to pinpoint actually when the story truly began, because it's an intriguing story, just so everybody knows. And there's multiple documentaries. When I say multiple, but a handful of documentaries that have been produced over the years on this particular story, and all of them kind of capturing it from one angle or another angle. But it's all been Cole's notes, never really going and capturing the whole essence of the story, if you will. And that's why we're doing this 8-part series here, because, and even at that, it's going to be Cole's notes. We're going to just touch on the highlights, but there is so much to the story, and it's really a story that's born out of tragedy. And that really begins, it's a multi-generational thing, and it goes back well beyond the 70s in time as to when the story kind of began. But when we actually begin to look at when it kind of comes to a climax, when things really start to take place, it was about 1971. My father, actually, I think it was August 1971. My father and my mother got married. And at this point, I mean, my mother's 17 years old. My father's 18 years old. They're just two kids. But they were about to begin a phenomenal journey. And, that journey would be riddled with all sorts of beautiful things emerging, including 9 children, but also there would be a lot of tragedy involved. And it goes back, like I said, multi generations, back to 50s, 40s, 30s. And so just to give a bit of background, my mother came from an Italian family. And so, my whole mother's side is Italian. And within the Italian portion of her family, there was a lot of mental illness, and I'm not sure necessarily why. I don't know. I mean, there's different aspects that we've discovered. Diet is a big factor in relation to the causation of mental illness. I recall growing up, we ate way too much pasta, way too many grains that were improperly processed, if you will. And a lot of those grains can act as an anti-nutrient if you don't deal with them appropriately. If you don't do what our ancestors used to do with them, with the sprouting and the fermentation and all that type of stuff, right? And so I don't know how much of a role that played into the mental health aspect, but needless to say, that whole side of my family is riddled with mental health conditions going back multi generations. You can actually break it right down. So I know second cousins, third cousins that all are plagued with the same issues that my family was plagued with. And so it was only about 6-7 years into the marriage, after my mother and father got married, that tragedy would strike, the first element of tragedy. And that would be when my grandfather, who I never had the opportunity to meet, went and took his life. And so you see in the picture here, you see my grandfather, you see my grandmother, my grandfather Gordon, my grandmother Eleanor, and you see their 5 girls at that point in time. Now their family got bigger at that, later on. They ended up having 2 sons as well. But you see the emergence of this beautiful family, middle class family, no issues like that, but riddled, just plagued with mental health conditions. And back then, back in the 70s, where did you turn? I mean, there was such
Mm,
a stigma surrounding mental health conditions. And so my grandfather ended up taking his life. And this had a tremendous negative impact on a family that was already predisposed to mental health conditions. And so when I take a look at my aunts, take a look at the upbringing that I had with my mother, and you see the mental health conditions that emerged out of all of this, and trauma oftentimes can be a catalyst to bringing on a mental health condition as well. And so if they weren't already struggling prior, which we do know that at least a number of them were, my mother included. Um, but for those who perhaps weren't struggling so much before with mental health conditions, the passing of my grandfather, the taking of his life, would have definitely helped push things over the edge for a number of them. And so what happened is about 5 years after that is when my mother really started to struggle with what would be diagnosed as bipolar disorder 1 with rapid cycling. And she struggled off and on for 10 years. And so during this time, though, she's got a lot of stresses. She's got a lot of beautiful children. Her and my father really started to establish some roots as they continued to grow their family. And what would eventually happen is after 10 years of struggling with these mental health conditions with the bipolar, she would begin to seek for help. And there's a little bit of background to all of this. That
David, I just want to ask you a question in regards to obviously the ancestral struggle with mental health, and it just makes me think of, at some point, obviously the family moved over from Europe to Canada and would have brought over with them their dietary culture. They would have brought over obviously the food that they would have consumed, for the family would have consumed for hundreds and hundreds of years from over in Italy and Europe, and kind of brought that over to over here. But we're talking about very different soil. We're talking about very different agricultural practices. I moved over kind of recently in the last 10 years ago. I moved from Europe to here, and my diet has had to change because the soil is very different. It's very nutrient depleted. It's not amazing over there, but it's very, very different in the way that, let's just say we spoke about pasta, for example. Whenever I go back to Europe and I consume pasta, it doesn't seem to bother me. It's absolutely fine. And I think that a lot of people who would have moved over in the let's say in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s from Europe, they would have maybe not been conscious of it, but their diets, they would have eaten the same, they would have gotten hold of the same foods and cooked the same meals, but it would have been very, very different nutrients within those foods within their bodies. So there has to be a conversation around the fact that, if we're seeing this rise of mental illness within the family, then are we talking about just a sudden emergence of chronic nutrient deficiency
Mhm.
because of that wild shift. So I just wanted to bring that in because I've had the experience of moving over here, and I've got the experience now of even if I'm just in a stressful state, my body is going to be using nutrients and vitamins and minerals specifically at a high rapid pace, and I have to supplement to stay fresh and in the game. So just thinking about it back then when they didn't really have the research and the science that we have now, it really would have been a struggle for a lot of those people. And it just makes me think that there has to be a connection with the food that they would have bought over and consumed, but the ability to actually make that same nutrient dense food would have been really different.
Absolutely. And we can correlate using the scientific literature. We can unequivocally correlate the fact that agriculture practices are directly correlated with the rise in mental health conditions as well as the rise in all chronic disease that is plaguing Western society right now.
Mhm.
And that actually, when I would do public presentations, that was one of the things that I would lay out as the basis of the presentation. So people understood the power of nutrition and the fact that when we take a look at soil samples and we take a look at the fact that we're working with less than 50% of the mineral content in the soils today is what we were 100, years ago. That's a huge issue. But then when we take a look at the effects of what I'll call the chemical revolution,
Mhm.
right? We go through the industrial revolution, but we've gone through a chemical revolution in relation to medicine, in relation to agriculture. We just find chemicals everywhere, unnatural, synthetic, foreign agents that are bombarding nature, that are bombarding our bodies, and it's having a significantly negative impact. But when we take a look at that, we can also correlate that the use of a lot of these synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides in agriculture and growing practices has actually caused a major depletion in the vitamin and mineral content found within those plants. And today, the science is showing you got to eat about 5 to 6.5 times the amount of food today if you're making healthy choices like a spinach salad or whatnot. You have to eat about 5 to 6.5 times the amount of that same salad is what your great grandparents would have had to eat
Yeah.
in order to get the same nutrient value. 5 to 6.5 times the amount. That's significant. And so when we take a look at what's taken place in North America, North America has kind of led the charge in relation to that chemical revolution, where we've had big industry, big chemical corporations that have just got a major foothold. So yes, when my ancestors moved over, those mental health conditions may not have been so prevalent at first, but carrying over and living by that cultural diet, which was still prevalent in my home, 3 generations after they had moved from Italy. I mean, we were still eating an Italian diet, very high in grains, very high in pastas, and so now by the time that we get into the 80s and the 90s, that's when by that point in time, we'd already seen a massive shift in relation to nutrient depletion. In fact, actually, we'd already seen a major shift in nutrient depletion. It was identified in 1937, actually, in the US, that there was already major chronic disease rising up because of the nutrient depletion from the soils.
Yeah.
1937, they already identified that, and they had a Senate hearing over that in 1937. So we'd already seen a major depletion in mineral content, but by the time that the 80s and 90s rolled around, we'd already seen that chemical revolution really getting a foothold, and things were different. So yes, good point to bring that forward. It's important to understand the impact that agriculture has had on destroying, really, the quality of the foods that we consume on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So, back to the timeline here. So, like 1978, your grandfather commits suicide, passes,
Yep.
and then that obviously is a very, very tragic thing for the family to deal with. And if there's this underlying mental health condition going on anyway within your mother, this is when we see her begin to like really struggle.
Yeah, so by the time that 1983 rolled around, it became a matter that it was diagnosable, right? That it was a clinical situation, if you will. That I mean, we all have our good days, we all have our bad days, we all go through our slumps in life. That just naturally happens,
Yeah.
right? For all sorts of reasons. But when it becomes chronic and so severe that it's now incredibly debilitating, that's when it ends up with a diagnosis, if you will, such as bipolar disorder, one with rapid cycling. So now we see where my mother is going through this situation of ups and downs and manic highs, and that is accompanied by inappropriate behaviors. For somebody to go on a manic high and you go on spending sprees, you you're up till 3, 4 in the morning, vacuuming the house, cleaning, whatever, because you're so manic. That's inappropriate. It's not healthy, and it's highly dysfunctional, especially in a major family situation. But then to go on the opposite end, when with a rapid cycle, all of a sudden my mother's into a depression, and she's not getting out of bed in the morning. And now, like if you show a picture of our family, you're going to see the responsibility there, that beautiful family. Sorry, I'm biased, but beautiful family, middle class. My father did very well. Was running a prominent, actually the second largest property management business in all of Alberta, multiple contracts in 3 different cities, had a lot of the government contracts, had his own little private plane that he would fly back and forth because, the distance between some of the cities was over 10 hours. And so, doing quite well. But when you have a mother who is in a major depression and she's not getting out of bed in the morning, then you've got, the older siblings are having to step in and take responsibility and start playing the role of parent to help get the younger ones ready for school in the morning and all that type of stuff. So we see that kind of dynamic starting to play out where it's having such a negative impact on my mother, that she is, incapable of, at times, incapable of playing the role of mother, of really living to her full potential. And so my mother went through 10 years of this, and then by the time that 1993 rolls around, my mother really needed a change at this point, and she wanted to move back to where she was born, back to where her cousins were, back to her roots. And so my father said, okay, he sells the business. He basically drops everything for her and says, okay, I guess we're starting on a new journey. And we moved to small town southern Alberta, Cardston, Alberta, about 3,500 people. And my father is trying to make a go at making sure all the financials needs are being met within our family. And he's having a struggle with it. And literally, like with how quick everything took place, and my father basically liquidating everything, selling off the business. He had a business partner as well, and they both ended up actually selling at the same time, and both moved. And so it's kind of an interesting summer, that year, summer of 1993. And I'm not sure how everything went down, but my father didn't leave with a whole ton of capital, if you will, from selling this business. And I'm not sure all the details there. And I don't think finances were managed incredibly well. And so I think the house that we had there, I think they kind of walked away from it because they bought in at a bad time in the 80s. Interest rates were high. And so I think by the time that they went to leave, it wasn't worth any more than what they had paid down on the mortgage, and or what was left owing on the mortgage. So I think they really kind of just walked away from it, and so they didn't get anything out of that. So we literally went from what I'd call riches, because we did quite well, to rags almost overnight. And as you can imagine, that would be an incredibly stressful situation, especially when there's still 7 children at that point in time living under the roof.
Yeah.
Right, because there's 9 children total between my mother and father, and my mother just being this incredibly loving person, it wasn't enough for her. So she was working the foster care system at one point in time, helping out troubled teens back right before I was born. And she ended up convincing my father to adopt this troubled teen, and so which made for a total of 10 of us. And by the time that picture was taken, my oldest sister, my adopted sister, had already moved out of the home. So that's why she wasn't in there. And she was going through her own struggles that eventually she would overcome as well. But, and so she wasn't present for that photo, but there was a total of 10 kids. And so there was a lot going on in the home, but now we're going through a financial hardship, and my mother's really struggling with this. And then Revenue Canada steps in and comes at my father and says, some of the trips that he made down to Mexico, down to central Mexico. It wasn't even like coastal Mexico where you go on vacation, but down to central Mexico. He was doing some business ventures down there as a side project. I believe it had to do with water treatment plants, because he's an engineer by trade. And so they came back at him and said, no, these aren't business expenses, and tried to say that they were all vacation expenses and that type of stuff. And so I can't remember all the details specifically there, but they came back and all of a sudden they started garnishing our family and left us with $800 a month. Now, I know $800 a month back in 1993 is a lot more than $800 a month is today. But still, back then, you can't raise a family of 7 children living under your roof on $800 a month. And so, I remember the day that, they sold the big van, because we had a couple vans. And so they had to sell the big van, the big family van that we used to travel in. And all of a sudden now we're starting to get, some nice clothes on our back again and whatnot. And so it was a really, really, really trying time. And so with my mother going through all this, the stress was pretty high. And so, which would obviously bring out the mental health condition even more. And so she went to the doctor in January of 1994 and received a prescription for Prozac. Now, back in 1994, Prozac, it's one of the newer drugs. It's one of the newer SSRIs that had just come out. This class of SSRI drugs, antidepressants, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, had come out in the late 80s. They were supposed to be like the blockbuster medication, and everybody's raving about it, right? And you got doctors even saying they should be putting Prozac in the water, right? As if it's like this
Right.
miracle drug. But there was a really interesting element to it all. There was a really dark element to it all, that there was evidence that showed, based on the studies that were taking place on these SSRI medications, that in general, the SSRI medications were increasing the risk of suicide by 2 times. So you were 2 times more likely to commit suicide by taking an SSRI medication versus taking a placebo during the trials. And this evidence was being suppressed. And Prozac in particular was one of the worst, because in certain situations, depending on the individual that was taking it, but in certain situations, given their condition, it could increase the risk of suicide by anywhere from 8 to 12 times. And this evidence was being suppressed. And so even though these doctors are being told that they're these miracle drugs at this point in time, and, just naively just promoting them, there was a dark element where it was causing a lot of loss of life, unnecessary loss of life. And my mother went and got on Prozac January 1994. By the time that January 30th, 1994 rolled around, it was a Sunday. We all went to church except for her and my 15-year-old brother at the time. And my dad was away on business, trying to make a go at this point in time, because we'd only been moved away from, at this point in time, it'd only been about 7 or 8 months into the move. And so he's still trying to get established to better our financial situation. So he's down 10 hours south in the States, working an MLM type business. And my mother stays home from church. My brother stays home from church. But then my brother came for the last portion of church. So now she's left alone for the period of about an hour and a half. When all of us got home from church, she wasn't there. I'm 10 years old at the time. I'm asking questions saying, "Where's mom? Where's mom?" Everybody's concerned. Where's mom? And there seems to be this heightened concern that starts to rise. Phone calls are made to my father down south. By the time that 10:30, 11 o'clock at night rolls around, we're still wondering, where's mom? And there seems to be this real, I don't know what you'd call it. I mean, I'm 10 years old and I'm trying to process my thoughts and emotions at the time, but there's just this heaviness to it, that there's a really heavy concern
A
that's kind of
sense,
coming in.
right? That
Yeah,
something's not right.
yeah, exactly. You can pick it up. And I go to bed and I wake up at about 4 in the morning hearing, the noise. And now I'm up in a loft at this point in time. I mean, we live in a 100-year-old house at the point in time. There's the main floor, there's the top floor, and then there's a loft up top. And as a 10-year-old, I thought it was just the most exciting thing. I got to live in this loft that you get to climb this ladder to get up there, right? And so I can hear from the main floor the sound of crying at 4 in the morning. And you just wake up with this heaviness because you'd gone to bed wondering, where's mom? Where's mom? And you go downstairs and you realize that there's a lot of people in the house and they're not your family members. And you're wondering what's going on. And so by the time that January 30th of 1994 rolled around, my mother had taken her life. Only 2 to 3 weeks onto the prescription of Prozac. Sadly becoming a statistic and leaving behind 9 children, 10 with my adopted sister. Nine of us, though, all having that predisposition to mental health conditions, to mental illness.
And your mother, she struggled, obviously. It built up after the passing of her father, so she was, struggling for 10 plus years, and then getting on Prozac within the month. Like, that's a phenomenal turnaround. I mean, that has to be a connection there. I mean, I'm sure if you look back at the data and the side effects that she, let's just say, she was was dealing with it for 10 plus years, and then she was able to get on this medication that was probably only like 5 or 6 years old, um, when she actually got diagnosed and prescribed the Prozac. But within the month, that's absolutely unbelievable.
The very thing that she thought was going to help her, because
Yeah.
clearly she was taking it because she felt she needed help. Clearly she went to the doctor because she felt she needed help.
Hmm.
But the very thing that was supposed to help her, statistically and evidentially, based on what would come out 10 years after this event, 10 years after the death of my mother, the evidence would emerge that the drug manufacturers knew it all along, that these SSRI medications were increasing the risk of suicide. And so now it comes out, and so yeah, there's definitely the correlation, but there's also the evidence to support it,
Yeah.
that she became a statistic at that point in time, that she became one of the needless losses of life. Not that there's ever really a needed loss of
Hmm.
life, if you will, but that unnecessary, completely unnecessary, no reason for it. If the evidence would have came out, if people would have been able to weigh the risk, it's one of those things that if there was a warning that said, look, this medication can help you, but it can also cause suicidal ideations. If you take it, be aware. If you start to feel suicidal, get off of it.
Yeah.
As soon as somebody's aware of that, the cognizance increases and they're able to put blame where blame needs to go. They're able to take a look at this and say, wait a minute, I wasn't feeling well before, but now I'm taking this. I've been considering the very purpose of life, and that it's just not like I don't feel like I should be here.
Hmm.
But I was told that this medication might cause that. Okay, maybe I should stop that rather than think, you know, I'm even on medications and there's clearly no purpose for life. Without that knowledge, it puts people in harm's way significantly. And so had they been forthcoming, the amount of loss of life would have been lessened so much. Those
Yeah.
who could have gotten help, and I'm not an advocate for pharmaceutical medications, especially when it comes to psychiatric medications. I'm not an advocate for them at all. But I have heard, because I've been working in this for 21 years, and I've worked with a lot of people, there are some people that in the moment, it's helped them. But it's not a long-term solution. But in the moment, it's helped them. And so perhaps those that could have received the help would receive the help, but those that it would have been devastating to and absolutely just destroyed life, destroyed families, just caused so much needless trauma and suffering, could have been prevented had the pharmaceutical companies been forthcoming and said, look, these can cause suicide. Beware. Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen example after example for 50, 60, 70 years of blockbuster life-changing drugs that come out, and we hear all the amazing positives behind it. They've got big marketing campaigns behind it as well. They get the doctors on board, and we all remember those old school advertisements for these medications, and even like cigarettes at one point. And it's quite remarkable that I think that if you're a little bit skeptical of pharmaceuticals and the way they're dished out, you have to just look back through history, and there's example after example of the pharmaceutical companies and the research that they do not being open and honest with all of the information. And I think if you're aware of the fact that even peer reviewed data, they're only able to peer review the information they're given by pharmaceutical companies. They don't get given 100% of the data to look through to make those peer reviewed claims. So it's just remarkable that that we're talking about 1993 here. It's 2024, and we still see, with very recent gene therapies that we've seen thrown out over the last few years. We're seeing more and more data and information coming out that these things may have been a lot more dangerous than we were told, that they were perfectly safe and effective. And we hear that time and time again through pharmaceuticals, and it just makes me think, what do they think the word safe means, and what do they think the word effective means for any of these medications? And yeah, I've been working in the natural health industry for well over 10 years myself, and I don't think there's an example of a pharmaceutical that will support anyone for anything chronic, and it won't. It just doesn't work like that. It just human body does not work like that.
Mm.
Pharmaceuticals are just very, very harsh, manipulated chemicals, and then at the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies are in existence to make money, not to make people healthy. I mean, we would have phenomenal healthy populations all around the world if that were the case.
Yep.
And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because also I think that the governments obviously are supposed to be these gatekeepers within these industries and the people. But we obviously see this revolving door. We see what money and power can do to individuals. And yeah, if you're not on this skeptical journey in 2024, I don't know if you're ever really going to get there. So it's yeah, it's just mind blowing that we're having this conversation about something that happened in 1993, and yet we still see similar patterns happening now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The game doesn't change. It's garbage tobacco science is what's being applied to the whole of the pharmaceutical industry. We're seeing that. We're seeing that there's proper science is being suppressed, which is another element of the story that we'll get to for those that will continue to watch these episodes. That the true science, the real science, is being suppressed and trying to be prevented from coming out. Studies are being shut down. And so there's a real element here to try to corral people into a certain thought process. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at the evidence, you're right. If the pharmaceuticals were performing, we would have a really healthy population if they were performing the way that people have been taught that they're to perform. But yet, when we actually take a look at the evidence, chronic disease is higher than it's been. Just looking at the last 100 years, 150 years as a snapshot, the chronic disease is like going up at an alarming rate. And we're talking about all forms of chronic disease. And so oftentimes in my presentations, if I'm going into more of a deep dive, I don't cover just mental health aspects. I'll cover off things like osteoporosis, thyroid issues, endocrine system issues, talk about cancers. You see that they're all rising quarterly at about the same rate, starting at about the same time in history. And it's not because all of a sudden they started diagnosing. It's
Yeah.
because there was a change in relation to our diet, and there was also the application of these medications, which oftentimes will mask symptoms, but create other symptoms and other forms of disease that individual wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah, and
So,
we're no longer just seeing these chronic serious conditions within, let's just say, the elderly population or the adult population. We're seeing it creep into kids and babies and toddlers now. And if that's not a super alarming fact that maybe our healthcare system has perhaps got things a little bit wrong,
mhm,
then I don't know what's going to really open up your eyes to that. But yeah, the fact that we're able to work with natural health, and we're talking about Empower Plus is this broad spectrum micronutrient that's just very available food that, regardless of your digestive capability, can get into your brain, can get into your body, get into your cells, and do what it needs to do.
mhm.
It's quite remarkable. But your mother passes 10 kids. Your father's then widowed to 10 kids.
Mhm.
And I think we're in like 94, 95 now, where your dad is you know seeing mental health concerns within the children as well.
Yeah, before we jump too far forward, I want to touch on just one point real quick because we're going to probably revisit this. My mother, when she takes her life, January 30th of 94, um, the official date is January 31st because that's when they found her. Um, they find a suicide note, and written into it is basically take the insurance money and pay Revenue Canada. Instructions to my father to do so. And this is going to become a relevant topic in a few moments. But so that's how that ends off. And my father is just left devastated. I mean, this is his wife of 22 years, over 22 years. He'd been married to her at this point in time. Would have went through hell and high water to be with her. Clearly did. I mean, left his really great position that he had up north, moved down south for new beginnings. He was willing to do anything for her, from what I could see growing up, right? And so now there's 7 of us living under the roof. My father shuts down his business ventures down south because he needs to stay home with the family. He takes on a job at the local hospital as the engineer there to oversee all of the functions there in small hospital. So didn't require a whole lot of. He was way overqualified as an engineer, a boiler room engineer. He was way overqualified, so it only took a couple hours a day or something like that. So then he also became the maintenance man, just so that he could be at home with
Yeah.
the kids. So here he is. I remember going with him from time to time when I wasn't in school, right? Saturdays, whatever, and going and doing maintenance with him, taking out garbages. Like that's what he had put himself down to, just so that he could be at home with the kids. Because there's 7 kids living at home, ranging from the age of 6 up to 18 years old at this point in time. And fortunately, there's my 18-year-old sister there, who's now kind of filling in and stepping in and playing the role of mother for the rest of us young kids. And so this is a situation we find ourselves in, but it begins to get really bad. It was already really bad before my mother took her life. By that point in time, my older sister, Autumn, was on medications. She was married at the time, still is actually. I should just make that very clear. But she had gotten married and had some serious mental health conditions herself, and ended up on a cocktail of medications. And this is before my mother even took her life. But now, like I said, I can speak from experience. Trauma oftentimes can serve as a catalyst to bring on these mental health conditions if they're already there underlying. And so things only got worse within my home, with my father's household after my mother had taken her life. And so there's 7 of us living under the roof that are all predisposed to mental health conditions, myself included. But there were some that were so severe that it made the rest of us look like angels, even though we were all struggling. And so my older brother, Joseph, 3 years older than me, began to go through some serious struggles himself. At this point in time, he's going through puberty, a lot of hormonal changes. This is oftentimes because there's an increased demand for nutrition as somebody's going through puberty. Through all of these developmental stages, the growth itself, that growth doesn't take place without nutrition. All the hormone changes, that requires a heightened level of nutrition. That's why generally teenagers will eat you out of house and home, because they have this massive increase for nutrition, this demand for nutrition beyond what an adult would. So they start to eat like crazy because they're trying to feed the system to allow for these proper changes, these developmental changes to take place appropriately. So now he's going through that and he's struggling really bad, and things get dark. He's in trouble with the RCMP. He's on weapons charges. He's in trouble with his school, constantly my father's getting phone calls from the principal's office in relation to, he's in a fight and this is happening. And it's just a constant battle with him. And my father gets him on medications. He's diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He's given lithium, which ironically really isn't a pharmaceutical. It's a mineral, but they administer it, 1, in the wrong form, and 2, in toxic doses, but very effective, ironically, using a mineral. And so he's on lithium, but he doesn't like the way that it makes him feel, right? And so he has troubles with compliance. And my father's trying to work with him. This is throughout 1994 and then into 1995, and things are just getting worse and worse. And now my sister at this point in time is in and out of the psych ward on a regular basis. Her husband, fortunately, faithful man, rather than divorcing her, stays by her side and supports her through all this. But when she's not in the psych ward, she's on 24-hour supervision, because at this point in time, she's obsessing about ways to kill herself and her 3-year-old son. That's on a cocktail of medications. At best, she was left sedated or in a zombie-like state. And so my father at this point in time is just watching his family go down the same path that their grandfather had gone down, who took his life 15 years before our mother had. And seeing that his children were going down that exact same path that their mother and grandfather went down, he began to exhaust in desperation, trying to prevent this cycle from repeating. He exhausted everything available to him within the medical system. He went and met with the head psychiatrist of the Foothills Hospital in Calgary, Alberta. She finally got so annoyed with him that she was just very straight and blunt with him and said, "Mr. Stefan, you need to face the reality here. This is not going to get any better. These are recurrent disorders." She pulled up the DSM-4 at that time, read out of it on bipolar disorder. That's a recurrent disorder. She says, "Mr. Stefan, that means that they don't go away. These disorders do not go away, and often in time they get worse. So you need to face the reality that this is as good as it's going to get, and that down the road you may have to plan more funerals." It's absolutely what he needed to hear, because it's at that point in time that no longer was he trying to exhaust the medical system any further. He'd gotten his answer. That's as good as going to get using pharmaceuticals. And he left that particular meeting in this incredible depression, just feeling despair. There's no hope. There's no hope. Why? Because he had never considered really anything outside of what the pharmaceutical industry had to offer. But at that point in time, there was no known answers outside of the pharmaceutical industry. And within the pharmaceutical industry, there was no known answers. They were just Band-Aid solutions that, hey, let's give you this medication. It's going to alter the way that you feel. It's going to change your personality, and it's going to suppress your emotions. And you're not going to be the same person. You're going to feel a little bit zombie-like, but at least you're not going to be incredibly depressed or psychotic, right? But your quality of life is going to be lousy. But, just carry on for the next 50 years like that. You might end up living in your parents' basement until they die, and then we'll see where that goes from there, right? Like, it's just, there's no hope. There is no hope, but it's like, okay, Band-Aid solution. And we make a lot of money off of you, because it's going to cost you about 300, well, not in Canada, not with socialized medicine, but it's going to cost the system about $300 per month for your dosage of medication for the rest of your life, by the way.
Yeah.
So very lucrative, but very disabling to the person who ends up using them. So my father, at this point in time, starts to consider, is there any other solutions out there? He starts to talk to people in the community, small town community. Almost everybody knows everybody. And he's talking to them about, hey, like, do you know anything about mental illness? You ever had any experience with it? Like, he's just desperate. He's looking for answers. Nobody had an answer for him, but there was people that had recommendations. And so all of a sudden we've got things like copious amounts of flax oil finding their way into our freezer, right? I'm not sure where he got it from, but like, we're talking lots of the stuff. And now Joe's taken all this flax oil, which omega-3 fatty acid is known to help alleviate the symptoms of certain mental health conditions. The only problem is that oftentimes it has to be in the pre-converted to DHA or EPA that you'll find within like fish oil. So flax oil won't do it unless you have adequate levels of magnesium, zinc, vitamin B3 and B6. Because if you don't have those, you don't convert that ALA into the DHA and the EPA that you need for cognition as well as cardiovascular health. So the flax oil probably didn't do him a whole lot of good, and we discovered why that was down the road, because he wasn't able to utilize it appropriately because he didn't have the companion nutrients available due to deficiencies, the very deficiencies that we discover were causing the mental health conditions in the first place. So he's going to flax oil. He's doing magnetic therapy, which great. He's drinking stuff like Tahitian noni juice. There's all sorts of stuff coming into the house. My father's willing to try anything, and he's using Joe as a guinea pig. And it's not working. And so Joe is still on his lithium throughout the entirety of this time. And finally, everything kind of comes to a head in November of 1995. Now, leading up to this, my dad just becomes so desperate. By about summer, probably June, July of 1995, not too long after he'd had this initial meeting with the head psychiatrist out of the Foothills Hospital, he starts to desperately plead and pray, seeking for an answer, saying, if there truly is a God above, God knows the answer, and surely God wouldn't want his children to suffer like this. And so he spent a lot of time in fasting and prayer and meditation on the matter. seeking for an answer. And he persistently did this for months. And finally, by November of 1995, everything would kind of come to a climax when he's walking down a hallway one day. Now, at this point in time, things had elevated in relation to his financial situation in his occupation. He had become the property manager over 26 large buildings, actually large churches, Mormon churches in southern Alberta. He had become the property manager over all those and oversaw everything being taken care of appropriately. And so he would spend a lot of his time traveling, hundreds of kilometers a day, just driving around, going through the whole southern Alberta, area corridor type thing, making sure that all these buildings were being maintained appropriately, providing guidance. And so in November of 1995, he's walking down a hallway one day in one of these churches, talking to a colleague about replacing carpets. And my father's overcome with this impression. You need to tell your colleague here, David Hardy, about what's going on at home. Now, you can imagine from a professional standpoint how inappropriate that is, right? You're talking about doing all this maintenance and everything within this building. And I'm not sure the role that David Hardy played, because I don't believe he was a carpet layer. So he was playing some kind of role there in relation to overseeing that building or something. I don't know exactly what it was. All I know is that my father did break down and told him everything that was going on, and basically ended off the conversation or his monologue saying, and if things don't change, we have no choice but to take Joe and put him into a psych ward because everybody's fearing for their lives.
Yeah.
He's extremely violent. He's volatile, homicidal, suicidal, stockpiling weapons, the weapons charges with the RCMP, the constant issues in the school. It's just, and it's worse at home, right? And so he ends off with that. And David Hardy had something really interesting to say to him. He said, Tony, I've got a large family like yours. Surprisingly, he actually had a couple more kids than my father did. And he says, but they're all well, they're fine. I've never had to deal with mental illness. He says, my wife's fine. So I can't relate to you on that level. He says, however, I spent over 20 years in the animal feed industry, formulating feed for hogs across Western Canada and Western United States. He says, we saw something common in the hog pens called ear and tail biting syndrome, where these hogs have become extremely irritable with each other. They bite chunks of their ears and tails off each other, hence why ear and tail biting syndrome. But the thing is if you didn't pen them away from each other, they'd actually kill each other. He says, we learned in the animal feed industry that by putting the proper nutrition into their feed, that you could completely eradicate this condition. And my father at that point in time, he'd already tried a bunch of stuff. Had already come in and out of the house. Joe had already been a guinea pig on so many different little experiments, and it didn't work. But in that moment, my father had this spiritual confirmation. It was like a light bulb moment, if you will, this epiphany. He says that he felt it from his head to his toes. It's like spiritual resonance, if you will, like just this boom, confirmation. It's the answer. And it's a really good thing that he felt that, because right after they go down, I believe it's within a day, they went down to a health food store. David Hardy, having an understanding he has actually a background in biology. He used to be a biology teacher at school, but then he went into the animal feed industry and all that type of stuff. So he's really dabbled in all that type of stuff. So he's got a much better understanding in relation to the nutritional sciences. And so him and my father go down to a health food store and they grab all these different products, kind of similar to what they would have been putting into the feed for the hogs, right? They grab all these products and they put Joe on them, but it didn't work. Now, if my father hadn't had that spiritual confirmation, he probably would have said, oh, there's one more thing, one more check. Okay, nutrition doesn't work. Magnetic therapy doesn't work. Tahitian noni juice is gross, doesn't work. Flax oil, gross as well, doesn't work. Like all this stuff. But my father, knowing it was the answer, this is November 1995, finally by January of 1996, it was actually January 18th, 4 different products arrived from the US after they'd already tried a bunch of different products. And these products were produced differently. Same ingredients, but produced differently in such a way that the body could actually assimilate them. Like pull them up, assimilate them, utilize them. They were bioavailable. And my father put them to the test on Joe. And within 5 days of Joe being on these 4 different products, Joe says it was like a fog lifted. And he could now see what was right and wrong. And so here my father, has been going through all this type of stuff, up until that point, working with Joe. He had just run short. Actually, he had just run up on his lithium prescription, and there was a major battle at this point in time between my stepmother and my father in January of 1996. My stepmother saying he needs to be on the lithium. He needs to be on the lithium. My father saying no, this is going to work. My stepmother went and got the prescription for the lithium and said, "Here's it. You do what you will." My father still has that full bottle of lithium to this day.
Wow.
It never had to get used. Within 5 days, Joe started to see the world differently. Within 30 days, he would have no longer been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. A month and a half later, my sister is now on the supplements. Not willingly, but because she was on 24-hour supervision. She had to come stay with our family for a bit while her husband was working a night shift for a week at a factory. And my father got her onto the supplements after she had a major panic attack while on that cocktail of 5 medications. Within 45 days, she was off of all those medications and doing way better than she had ever done in her whole entire life, because she had these mental health conditions going right back to her adolescence. And now she's able to function. And there's a major dynamic shift in the relationship between her and her husband. And no longer does she have to be on 24-hour supervision, because she's not thinking about killing herself or her 3-year-old son. She's now taking on side projects, little side businesses, doing what she wants to do, playing the role of mom, just thriving in what she wants to do. And it's just a beautiful thing. And
Do
so
we know? Sorry, David. Do we know what those 4 products were? Do we know, were they individual ingredients? Were they combination of things? And why did they have to come from the US?
great. Yeah, fantastic question. Thank you for the providing the means to have clarity on that. It was extremely complicated. The first one was a colloidal mineral supplement, having a lot of different minerals in there, but being put into a colloidal form, which allowed for it to be bioavailable. We don't absorb rock form minerals. And if you do, you might be in a little bit of trouble. You might end up with some kidney stones. You might end up with deposits in the body in areas that you don't want. But we generally don't absorb rock form minerals, which unfortunately within the natural health industry for many, many years, that's how minerals were coming. They weren't coming chelated. They weren't being bound to organic molecules. They were literally coming in the raw elemental form, which is not good. And so the colloidal mineral supplement was absolutely crucial. And we'll learn about that in a brief moment when the first study took place. But also there was 2 other main products. One of them being a multivitamin mineral supplement coming from a company that was chelating at that time. And back then, back in the 90s, chelation was not a big practice. So what was happening is they were taking these minerals and they were binding them to an organic molecule that allowed for the body to recognize as natural, because that's what happens in the soil under ideal conditions. It's what is uptaken into plants under ideal conditions. And then when you eat those plants, that's the form of minerals that you should be getting. Chelated. They're bound to organic molecules. So the multivitamin mineral was being chelated, but then also a calcium magnesium phosphorus supplement that was being put in the proper balance that was also chelated, and then grape seed extract, which allowed for it to. The grape seed extract is important to help push a lot of that nutrition into the brain, right? It just provides a venue for, or a means by which it can be delivered to areas of the body that it otherwise wouldn't so easily be delivered, which is so crucial. So those 4 different products. So colloidal mineral supplement, calcium magnesium phosphorus supplement that was chelated, multivitamin mineral supplement that was chelated, as well as grapeseed extract. So the 4. They called it the quad program. And it worked. And now it worked with my sister. It worked with my brother. My sister got off those medications, feeling better. My brother never had to ever take that lithium again. January 1994. Neither of them had to go and visit the psych ward. And so that was a beautiful thing. Joe fortunately never had to go, but he was going to go. Autumn was in and out of the psych ward on a regular basis. Never again did she have to go. And so it completely changed their lives. And so now word starts to spread, because we live in a small community, and people are asking my father, what have you done with Joe? He's a different person. And it begins to just grow. The business is growing organically. It's not actually, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't a business at this point in time. The concept began to grow organically. My father was answering questions. People were trying it for the kids with ADHD, their wife with depression, anxiety, all this type of stuff. People were using it, and it began to spread like wildfire in this small community where everybody knew everybody and everybody talks. And when people start to have their lives radically transformed, including this lady who lived just a block down from us, most people didn't even know she existed. They only saw her husband because she was agoraphobic. The only time that she'd come out of her house was to go to the doctor, to make her doctor's appointments. All of a sudden, she's showing up at church. All of a sudden, she's walking around the neighborhood. Like, who's this lady, right? Like, been here for how many years and nobody, like, right? And so all of a sudden, people, things are like that are taking place, and it's just phenomenal. And so finally, what happens is my father looks at this with David Hardy, because they're both working on this. They're both really intrigued at the discovery that they're making. And they say, hey, we need to get this into the hands of doctors. Like, this needs to be researched.
Yeah.
And so they go and they pursue that venue. They try to get it researched, and they start coming up against roadblocks, realizing it's not so easy as that. But what happens is eventually Dr. Bonnie Kaplan on the University of Calgary would decide, to take it on. We'll try one study. Let's see where it goes. And she starts to see the phenomenal results from it. But then halfway throughout the study, everybody's symptoms began to relapse, and they're all wondering why. But it wasn't just happening in the study; it was also happening within our community, within our own home. Well, what happened is that colloidal mineral supplement, something changed in it. The levels of nutrients, levels of minerals in there, the balance of it had changed depending upon the batch. And so that we were now into a new batch, and that new batch was not nearly as efficacious as the previous batch. And so the study was shut down because you can't study variables and say, oh, here's our findings using a product that changed halfway through the study. But then we were left looking for a replacement. And after a great deal of research, great deal of prayer, my father just seeking for inspiration on the matter, because this is complicated, right? The nutrition aspect of it. How do we produce our own supplement after they'd already tried all sorts of replacements that didn't work? How do we produce our own supplement that's actually going to work? That's going to produce the results that we're looking for. That's going to, correct people's behaviors, going to turn their lives around and allow them to live the way that they need to live, that they want to live. And so eventually what would come out of it by about 1998 was the EMP, the Empower Plus, would be birthed, if you will.
There's a picture of it there. That's the original bottle. Central nervous system support.
That's the first bottle. So as you can see, Truehope isn't even a brand at that point in time. Truehope has been established, but it's been established as a support program solely to help people come off medications, because we discovered, most of the people that we're working with are on medications, and those medications can be extremely addictive. And we recognized that at first with Autumn on our cocktail of 5 medications. She got off quite rapidly, 45 days, but we realized that we had to establish a support program to help people come off of their medications, because the doctors weren't being trained on how to take their patients off medications. They weren't even being trained that their patients would ever come off the medications. It's like, you're on this for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. If it stops working, we're going to swap you over to this medication or this medication, and that's how we're going to deal with you for the rest of your life, not take you off the medication. So that comes out, and as you can see, that bottle is a lot bigger than the bottle right here.
Because it says 448 capsules. That's a big bottle.
And the reason being is we were chelating it. We teamed up with the same manufacturer that we were getting the other two, the multivitamin and the calcium, magnesium, phosphorus supplement. We teamed up with them so that they could apply their chelation technology to it so that it'd make it bioavailable. But even with doing that, people had to take up to 48 capsules per day to get well. Now, when they were doing what we call the quad program, they were doing more nutrients than that, even multiple shot glasses of colloidal mineral throughout the day, and then multiple handfuls of the calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, the grapeseed extract, as well as the multivitamin. So it wasn't much different, but 48 capsules a day, that's a lot, a lot. Mm-hmm. But people were doing it. And the reason being is because the benefits, the life transformation that was taking place, even though they were eating basically a meal of capsules throughout the day, it was worth it, because all of a sudden they were emerging and seeing who they were. The light started to shine. The joy started to reemerge in their life. They weren't, just stuck in this pit of despair and anxiety and depression and mania or psychoses, whatever you want. Like, it's just incredible life transformations taking place. And so eventually we would get that to go down. But before we get there, I want to just briefly touch on, at the same time, I mean, we're talking about really the Stefan family saga here, which is completely interconnected to the Truehope story, if you will. It is a Truehope story. There's another element that emerges at this point in time, because in about 1997, as the first studies taking place, where all these discoveries are starting to be made, Revenue Canada reemerges again on the scenes, and all of a sudden, my father receives this, assessment on my deceased mother and back taxes. And my father at this point in time is not in as much of a broken state. And so he's saying, I would have fought you the first time, but I didn't have the energy to do so with all the changes in my life, type of thing. Like, that's what's going on. He's now in a better position. And so he takes a stand. And my father's a warrior. Anybody who knows him, right? Like, when you get him, he is a warrior, and he knows how to battle. He knows how to bring the battle to your doorstep. And so Revenue Canada comes back at him, and it would change literally the history of Canada, because he would end up exposing everything that they had done that was illegal in relation to how he dealt with, or how Revenue Canada dealt with our family, in garnishing his salary to the point that we weren't living off $800 a month. Fortunately, we had what would, Mormons, have a tendency to have food storage. And so back then we had this food storage, rice and beans. And so, being a practicing Mormon back then as a family and all that, we were living off rice and beans that they had purchased years before. And that was what basically was carrying us through for food wise, right? Was living off rice and beans. And so he exposed the fact that Revenue Canada had put us illegally into a state of hardship, and that they went against their own protocols in doing so. And it ended up going national. There was national radio shows being held. He was going head to head, or toe to toe, I guess, against, the deputy minister that was over top of Revenue Canada. He was literally, like, it was guns blazing battle with Revenue Canada. CBC Quebec would come out, French CBC, and they would come out and do a mini documentary on our family at that point in time in relation to the battle. And what he did is he provided the venue and the opportunity for other people to start sharing their stories as well. And all of a sudden, Revenue Canada is just getting a massive black eye as all of these other families are coming out, all these other people, sometimes destroyed families, where Revenue Canada had been operating basically like a mafia organization and just destroying people, just absolutely destroying people, and how they were receiving perks to do so, these agents. And they were denying it. And yet my father was able to uncover it and expose the fact that, yes, these agents are receiving perks for doing these egregious things to families, as long as they can extract just a little bit more money that wasn't owed to Revenue Canada in the first place, even under contract with Revenue Canada to pay taxes, right? So the whole thing, what just came out, and finally Revenue Canada just told my father, you know what, go away. We don't want to hear about you anymore. Like, my father was going to have a lawsuit against them, and they just said, no, go away. We don't want your money. We don't want, right? And it went away. But in the meantime, Jason Kenney, at this point in time, many people know him as the former premier of Alberta during the whole COVID ordeal, if you will. And anyways, Jason Kenney at that time was a young federal MP, and he had consulted with my father and saw the whole situation, and he ended up drafting up what I believe it's called the Taxpayers Protection Act, to basically protect taxpayers from the egregious actions of Revenue Canada. Revenue Canada then shifts, they rebrand, and they become known as Canadian Revenue Agency. They're now known as CRA at about that same time. And it's interesting because my sister went and took accounting in school. And what was interesting about it is that she actually learned about our family story through her accounting class,
That's crazy.
based on the fact that it shifted the way that Revenue Canada or Canada Revenue Agency interfaces now with people. So that battle took place. Now, the reason I want to bring that up is that it's going to pay. It's gonna serve as a predecessor, if you will, to the next set of battles that would come up shortly thereafter. Because it's like these battles just found my father. When one would end, the next would emerge almost immediately. So the Empower Plus is produced, big bottle, as you'd showed earlier on. Let's see here. Is there okay? Where are we at here? Okay, it's produced, and over time we would get down to the point that we would improve the chelation technology. We would begin to micronize those minerals and made it so that you didn't have to take 48 capsules a day, but rather 4 to 6 capsules a day. Same ingredients, same balance, same formula, just that much more bioavailable. And so we discovered that over time that's the way that it would go. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. University of Calgary, Dr. Bonnie Kaplan decides to study it again. This time, the standalone product. It's not a variable, not using 4 different products that are shifting and whatever based on the batch. This is a solid product. The quality is there. It's working. It's been introduced. People are taking it, and it's changing lives. So she begins to study it, and she gets so excited, her and her colleagues, about the results that they actually published the preliminary results, and it ends up making national news. And I think we have that news clip, don't we?
I think that we do. Yeah. Yeah. I'll play that right now.
All right.
On CTV News, can a nutritional supplement help people suffering with a troubling mental disorder? CTV's Avis Favreau has an exclusive report you won't want to miss. Watch CTV News tonight at 11.
In medical news tonight, there is new reason for optimism for sufferers of bipolar disorder, a condition that causes manic depression and a condition that affects hundreds of thousands of Canadians. According to findings of a small study presented today to the Canadian Psychiatric Association, a combination of vitamins and minerals may alleviate the disorder's debilitating symptoms. CTV's medical specialist Avis Favreau reports.
Bipolar illness ran through Tony Stephan's family. His wife, Debbie, committed suicide. His son and daughter were also ill and on drugs that didn't work.
She had already been taking medication for over 4.5 years, and she was going to suicide. It wasn't helping. My son was on 900 milligrams of lithium per day and was absolutely out of control.
Then he learned of minerals and vitamins given to pigs with a nervous disorder. In desperation, he gave a variation of the supplements to his son.
Within 30 days, he no longer experienced any of the symptoms of bipolar affective disorder.
Both his children, he says, are still on the supplements and are well some 4 years later. Now, doctors at the University of Calgary say they have intriguing early results from a group of 10 bipolar patients on the same supplements. Most had less depression, fewer manic episodes, and improved mental well-being.
The decrease in their symptoms is of a magnitude that is very impressive. Any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention.
And most have cut their standard drug use by 2/3.
This is an entirely different approach to the standard medical therapies that we use now.
But Steve Morton, who was part of the Calgary study, says the nutrients helped put his life in order after the bipolar illness left him suicidal and in hospital.
This has brought me to recognize a new me, and has allowed me to become, a new person.
In fact, the Alberta government is investing more than $500,000 to fund more rigorous studies of these supplements.
All right.
Amazing.
Now you can imagine, right? Like my father's, his objective in all of this is, let's get this into the hands of doctors. David Hardy, that's working with him, is let's get it scientifically validated, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, my father's objective is, let's bless other families so they don't have to go through the same suffering that my family's had to go through, right? This news clip comes out, And there's like tremendous amount of hope that this is actually going to happen, because that study showed that the Empower Plus is over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. Like, that's huge.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the antidepressants at that point in time were showing to be no more effective than placebo. But placebo is somewhat effective, which is kind of cool, right? So do yourself a favor, rather than go take an antidepressant, take a placebo. Literally, you're splitting hairs in relation to the statistical differences when it comes to efficacy, right? But if you want something over 3 times more effective than an antidepressant or a placebo, take proper nutrition, the very nutrition you needed all along to produce the neurotransmitters and hormones necessary to regulate your mood, right? That simple, very logical.
Yeah.
So this is getting exciting. Well, literally the next day after that news clip aired in October of 2000, Health Canada comes in, shuts down that double-blind placebo-controlled trial that was referenced right at the end of the news clip. The Alberta government was funding over $544,000 into a double-blind placebo-controlled trial that would validate that Empower Plus did, in fact, do what we were claiming it was doing in, at this point in time, thousands of people across the world. And so Health Canada comes in, they shut down the study, and they contact my father, said, you're in contravention of Section 3132 of the Food and Drugs Act. In order to help somebody with bipolar disorder, you require a drug identification number. A drug identification number on a multivitamin mineral supplement. And so my father actually attempted to work with them, saying, oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was out of compliance. Right? Had no idea. Nobody told me. And so he tried to work with them, only to realize that they had an agenda. And the agenda was, you're not getting a drug identification number. And at one point in time, as he's working with these Health Canada agents in a meeting, they stated to him, you know, Mr. Stefan, if you want to continue doing what you're doing, perhaps you just want to move south of the border, right? Like, just go do it down in the States. As if, you know, this tremendous discovery, this life-changing discovery isn't welcome in Canada, that Canadians aren't deserving of having access to it. No. You just stay on these drugs for the rest of your life and enjoy the lack of quality of life. And hopefully you won't be cognizant enough while you're on these medications to even know you don't have a quality of life.
Yeah.
Like, that's really what's being pushed on them. And so now this discovery is being made that's going to be way less expensive than pharmaceutical medications. And not only is it going to actually correct the issue, but it's going to help people become contributing members of society rather than just a Band-Aid, live in your basement, you know, of your parents type of thing, whatever. Like, so here Health Canada is actually denying this phenomenal discovery that would significantly improve the health of Canadians. And so when my father realizes they have this agenda, he says, okay, I don't need the permission of some bureaucrat in Ottawa to tell me whether or not I can help other families in the way my family's been helped. And so he took a moral high ground and said, no, I'm not listening to you, Health Canada. I'm going to continue to make sure that people have access to this, because, you know, heaven knows that how many other families will end up going through what my family's gone through if they don't have access to a proper solution. And so it wouldn't be too terribly long before Health Canada would start to supply him with cease and desist orders saying, stop what you're doing. And he would just continue to ignore those in favor of making sure people had access to these supplements. And so finally, there's some developments that take place that really would have aggravated Health Canada, because, you know, shutting down the studies, trying to suppress evidence, you know, that's one way to try to demarket, to, you know, maybe they won't be able to get a footing in the marketplace. Maybe people won't hear of them. But then something happens. And in September of 2002, the Discovery Health Channel launches a full-length documentary on the discovery of Empower Plus and our family story. It ends up going big. It's a full-length documentary called Impossible Cures. Do we have a clip of that, by the way?
We do, yeah. We can definitely leave a link for the full thing as well, so we can share a little bit of it here.
Yeah, maybe a minute of it or something like that.
You are watching Discovery Health Channel.
You know, I was quite certain that I could kill almost anyone. I could do these things without even thinking twice about it.
A family's legacy. Bipolar disorder, a debilitating mental illness. By January of 1996, Tony Stephan was at his wit's end. His wife had committed suicide after a decade-long battle with bipolar disorder. Then his daughter and son were diagnosed with the same disease. 15-year-old Joe was tormented, too, by suicidal thoughts.
I was always quite certain that I would never make it through, to next summer or to the beginning of school again, stuff like that. I was always expected.
So this comes out and it goes big, as you can imagine, like really big. In fact, they push it into 50 different countries, translate it into multiple languages, and our business, like we can't keep up. Like it's a beautiful thing because the amount of people that are desperate that didn't know of any other solutions, that were doing the same thing my father did, exhausting everything the medical system had available and to no avail. Now all of a sudden there's an alternative hope, if you will, or a true hope, right? Like not to be cliche here or anything, but like it's just. And so our phones are ringing off the hook. Well, remember, this is September 2002. Health Canada comes in early 2003 after the cease and desist orders had been ignored, and they shut the product down at the border. We were having it manufactured in the US, utilizing some of these different technological advances, if you will, in relation to nutritional therapy, making sure that those minerals were in organic form so that your body could actually utilize them. And so we were having it manufactured down there. And at this point in time, there's 3,000 Canadians relying on the Empower Plus, absolutely relying on it, right? Come off their medications. Without the medications, they're not well. With the medications, they're not well. But like they're just not well. And they get on the supplements, and all of a sudden they're like, a lot of them are going back to school again, getting their post-secondary education that they always wanted to get, or pursuing their dreams, starting up businesses, or just playing the role to a much greater degree than they otherwise could have, as a father or a mother, right? Like just stepping up and becoming a much better version of themselves. And so this is incredibly beautiful. And now Health Canada stops it at the border. So you got 3,000 Canadians screaming out saying, wait a minute, where is this? And where's our products that they'd ordered? And so Health Canada, this is early. This is like, I think it's about February, March of 2003 that they do this. And so all of a sudden our call center is getting bombarded with calls from desperate people, basically pleading for their lives. Health Canada knows it's going to create a crisis. And in their own documentation, before they even stopped it at the border, even before they seized the products, the shipments coming in, they identified that there would be a crisis that would emerge. They'd be putting people potentially in harm's way. It's in their own internal documentation that we got our hands on down the road. So what do? They set up a 1-800 crisis line. So you phone the crisis line, and it's a script. They're stating you'll no longer have access to this dangerous supplement, and basically go back to your doctor, right, and get on medications. Did we have a clip of I think we have a news clip that actually kind of covers that. I think the Bedlam one. Is that correct?
No, I've just got the red umbrellas coming up next.
Okay. Well, all right. So okay. So I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm jumping into the next episode. Let's not do that. I don't want to spoil it.
No.
So things start to come to a climax. Health Canada knows that they're putting people in harm's way. Smuggling rings start up from otherwise law-abiding citizens. Protests begin. We go and we set up a protest in Edmonton, 5 hours north of us, in front of the Federal Minister of Health's office. And to get some attention, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Before this takes place, we try to be very diplomatic. And Autumn, my older sister, decides that she's going to, take a number of other women that she never knew before this, but that are all part of this crisis together, all mothers seeking, to have these supplements available either for themselves or for their sons or daughters, and that they're going to go to Ottawa and that they're going to get the ear of the government and say, look, it's a multivitamin mineral supplement and we need it. We need it. And so Autumn arranges for this, and something interesting happens where they go out there, they're standing on Parliament Hill, waiting to get the ear of a politician, and it starts to get rainy. And so something serendipitous would take place. They would go to a store, pick up umbrellas, and all that was available was red umbrellas. So all of them ended up with red umbrellas, and they became known as the ladies with the red umbrellas, even discussed in Parliament. And it would become a symbol for health freedom for years to come that we would then see later on during the whole Australia, New Zealand debacle that they were applying within their health regulations. We would see this symbol emerging down the road as a symbol of health freedom. But anyway, so you've got a clip on that. I'm not sure when you want to show that.
Yeah, I'll share that right now because it's just a short one.
In 2002, the supplement was involved in a highly publicized battle with Health Canada. The government accused Truehope of making false claims about the product's effectiveness. The matter went to the Supreme Court, a battle which Truehope won.
There you go.
All right. So we got a little bit ahead of ourselves there in relation to court proceedings, but and we'll talk about that later. So now we go to so this is happening. The Liberal government at this point in time, and I'm not saying pro-liberal, pro-conservative. We've experienced all sorts of egregious things under both. So this is not a plug one way or the other. All I'm saying is the Liberal government was in charge at that point in time, and it was bad. We set up in front of the Federal Minister of Health's office, the Liberal MP, Anne McClellan. We set up a protest there. And literally the next week, a gun-drawn raid takes place on our head office, backed by 9 Health Canada agents. So basically, you know, everybody here has watched movies, TV shows, whatever. I'm sure that demonstrate what that looks like. That's what you see. All of a sudden, you've got coming through the front doors of our support center, where, now imagine this, behind the closed doors, it's just a big glass front kind of on the building, right? Lots of windows. Behind those windows, you've got all of these women, couple men, but mainly women, that are running the support program. They're taking phone calls from over 100 different countries. We had to hire, you know, somebody who spoke Portuguese, Spanish, that type of thing. Like we've got multiple people in there able to communicate with people from different countries that don't speak English. And all of a sudden, you know, nice summer morning, you know, first week of June, second week of June, all of a sudden the doors come busting open, and you've got all these RCMP agents just coming through, guns drawn. Get away from your desk. Get away from your desk. Right? Like it just is. It's a drug bust, right? It's a drug bust, and these are middle-aged women. Actually, some of them are like, you know, 55, 60 years old, and you've got these RCMP coming in like a bunch of thugs, unknowingly thinking that they're involving themselves because they've been told one story, thinking that they're involving themselves in a drug bust, to then it's not a drug bust. And so things really, really began to heat up at that point in time as that happened.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Yeah,
I believe that's where we're going next with the next episode, isn't it?
Yeah, when we come into part 2, we're gonna dive a lot more into that experience of the gun drawn raid on Truehope headquarters, and I think that it's just really incredible that just from October 2000, when the University of Calgary and Dr. Bonnie Kaplan was studying Empower Plus, and it was shown to be 3 times more than antidepressants, and that news clip went, you know, nationwide, and then Health Canada the next day came in and shut all of that down. There's quite clearly conversations in the background in regards to this product is a competitor to something that significantly funds Health Canada's organization, which is antidepressants, other pharmaceutical drugs that Health Canada has to approve. And I think it's more than 2/3 of the funding that Health Canada receives comes from pharmaceutical industries. So having a product come up like this that's getting the research and it's getting press, it was obviously a massive competitor, a massive risk to that whole situation. And the fact that they would knowingly put thousands of people's lives at risk by blocking it at the border just goes to show the the remarkable depths that they would go to stop this product being manufactured and actually getting into the hands of Canadians who, in my opinion, absolutely have the right to take whatever they want for their health. So yeah, it's a very interesting segue into part 2, which will be coming out next week, where we will dive a little bit further into that and take us through the story a little bit more. But do you have any words to finish up with, David, before I close this out?
I think you closed it quite well. It was interesting to see through all of this. I mean, even though we'd already been through our own battles with Revenue Canada, distrust of the government was higher than what most would have towards the government. At this point in time, there's still a naivety around Health Canada and the role they're playing, and you think that they're there to protect the health of Canadians. And throughout this, just even the first 3 years of working with them, it became quite clear that they weren't there to protect the health of Canadians. They were there to protect the bottom line financial interests of the pharmaceutical industry, no doubt about it, especially with the clear-cut, solid evidence that came out and has continued to come out. And I don't want to be a spoiler, because by the time that we get to episode 8, I mean, I think we're going to be talking about some serious things in relation to what Health Canada is doing today that's relevant to everybody, and their health freedoms. But it's become abundantly clear, and it was clear back then, that there was definitely conversations in relation to financial interests of big corporate, if you will, big pharma, and Health Canada was really doing the bidding of big pharma throughout all of this, at the cost of human lives, Canadians' lives, really. And I guess we'll touch on that more next episode.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you very much, David, for joining me today to take us through part 1 of the Truehope Family Files. And I'm sure that this first episode of 8 is really going to take people on a big journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. And blessings to you.
Thank you. Well, that is it for part 1 of this special Truehope Cast series. We'll be back with you next week for part 2 of the Truehope Family Files, where we're going to dive a little bit more into that gun-drawn raid by Health Canada, and a whole lot more is going to be happening. Believe me, it really does get quite spicy. But be sure to share this episode with family and friends. Give us a review on Spotify and iTunes if you want. But thank you so much for watching. We'll be with you very, very soon. And that's it for this episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. See you soon.